Man has forgotten true struggle, as well as those who require it to survive.
What does it mean to give up? There are two ways you can go about this question. Either what constitutes giving up or what happens after you give up. Both have different answers for different people. Your experience with living is what dictates the meaning of both those questions. We all have given up on different things, some important, some pointless. There's no right answer to these questions, just some answers that fit some people best. Still, you can debate a right answer nonetheless. That's philosophy. This video is only about one perspective on the subject of giving up and despair, and hopefully it's one that you will find some meaning in. This video is about Mlynar Nearl from Arknights, a character that gave up and the consequences of his decision. And yes, it's pronounced Mlynar, not Mlynar, unlike what some of you might believe. Like the past me. Surprisingly, not much else I have to say in the intro, so let's just start.
These so-called foes, not even worth drawing my sword.
Mlynar was what some would say privileged. To understand his story, we first need to understand his nation and bloodline. The place of interest is Kazimierz, which is a nation based on Poland, and the history of Kazimierz closely mirrors the history of Poland as well. I can't confirm because I'm not Polish, but trust me, Kazimierz is Poland. I can feel it in my dreams. It's a country filled mostly by Kuranta people with horse traits, along with a healthy dose of other races. It is probably the most capitalistic country in all of Terra, the Earth of Arknights. It is also a land with a rich history and culture rooted in knighthood. You combine these two elements and you get an overproduced, highly marketable sport, which is what Kazimierz is mostly known for. That sport is a fighting sport that quote-unquote knights from all over Terra participate in. A glory-filled bloodfest that has become fully normalized. It is called the Kazimierz Major. It is a triennial event that takes place in, of course, Kazimierz, and makes a crazy amount of money. Not just from tickets, but from merchandise as well. The knights of Kazimierz weren't always like this. They used to be more like actual knights, but after capitalism struck Kazimierz, knighthood never recovered. Now, the only reason why they are called knights is because that is what sells. Kazimierz has always been known for its knights. People don't want to bet on gladiators or competitors, but the knights that Kazimierz is known for. There's a lot going on within the major. There are clubs that the knights belong to, some knights that perform well over and over again get titles, has a bunch of rules, and also has a lot of investors and stakeholders. It is literally a sport. There are also the infected knights that get segregated, but I don't need to talk about them here. Things weren't always like this. It used to be a typical Middle Ages European country, a monarchical society, just with a lot more knight culture. That is until the Terra equivalent of Genghis Khan decided to get a little freaky and turned all of Kazimierz into jobbers. Kazimierz managed to survive through peace negotiations, but the ruling class of the time basically lost all of its power. With the monarchy gone, the knights of the time slowly formed a union through democracy, and eventually that led to the rise of capitalism within Kazimierz. And yeah, Arknights Genghis Khan didn't actually want Kazimierz, he just pounded them for the lulz. They were just in the way of his conquest, so he razed them to the ground and quickly continued towards his actual goal, leaving Kazimierz behind and just dying in the north, I guess. Back in Kazimierz, it took them quite a while to get to where they are now, but eventually even the knights that first usurped Kazimierz fell to the clutches of capitalism, losing most of their power to the people actually running the economy. But as a nation, Kazimierz also had enemies around itself. Throughout centuries, even before the fall of the monarchy, one of Kazimierz's main foes was Ursus, basically Arknights to Russia. I told you Kazimierz was based on Poland. Basically, the two nations had been at a stalemate for centuries, but eventually, Ursus managed to conquer a lot of Kazimierzian, I think, territory. Chronologically, it's not that long ago, like 50 years before a lot of what I'm going to go over in this video. Probably less. Ursus managed to occupy the Kazimierzian soil for around a decade until the Kazimierzian campaign knights launched a full assault and recaptured their lost territory. Ursus was going through a lot of problems of its own, so the occupied territories were left weak. It wasn't an easy fight. Actually, it was almost impossible even with the weakened defenses. But through the leadership of Nearl, the campaign knights were successful. Nearl was not only from the prestigious Nearl household, but also his youngest son is the focus of this video. Mlynar Nearl was also a knight, one that helped all around Kazimierz, keeping the legacy of his father intact. He brought glory, inspired his fellow knights, and saved the innocent masses from grief, along with his brother, his friends, and other knights. And so, we are slowly reaching the end of this history lesson. To this day, Kazimierz is still on a political civil war between the capitalist merchants and the tradition-loving knights that see the merchants as a stain on Kazimierzian culture. It is doing as well as any other nation. It's having small skirmishes with Lithuania, another one of its enemies, and is slowly taking notice of the growing nation of Xerok, which I have made a video on. So, where is Mlynar Nearl in the present day? He was a hero and a really powerful knight. So, what is he doing? Well, he's working as an office worker, barely making enough money in a household that is slowly dying. Every day he's getting yelled at by his boss, and the people who know him treat him like a joke. A proud stallion that lost all of its passion. How did this happen?
All those I have yet to abandon.
Mlynar was a strong man, one of the few operators with lore-accurate strength. Being from the Nearl family, his blood is special as well. He was born with very powerful arts, which only got stronger under the care of his dad and other campaign knights. They trained him well, and he learned like a sponge. He not only had talent, but also great people around him. And most importantly, looks. Members of the Nearl family are radiant. What I mean by that is that their originium arts is some sort of light element. Whatever you think that means. It can be a healing light, a burning light, or a faith-scaling light. Basically, it's whatever the writers want it to be. The only real consistency is that it's bright and it's strong. Outside of his arts, while not a team player, he can comfortably work in whatever group that needs him. He has never been bossy with his teammates either, and is a very good follower. Overall, there is a reason why I said he was privileged. He had everything. Power, reputation, a bright future, and even his family. While he never got romantical with anyone, as far as we know, maybe he's a wild animal, I don't know. He did have a brother that he was close to. That brother was romantical, enough to have a wife, which was strong like him, and 2 children. The couple were called Nearl and Jolanta. The two were some of the knights that helped with the war against Ursus, and were both MVPs, with Schnitz being capable enough to not only garner the respect of his fellow knights, but also his Ursan enemies. I'm not sure if Mlynar himself was a part of the Kazimierz-Ursus war. It's not clear just how old he is. All we know is that he is younger than his brother. So most likely he wasn't part of that war. But that's not important. What's important is that Schnitz and Mlynar were on great terms and were very good brothers. However, Schnitz and Jolanta both disappeared out of nowhere, leaving behind their 2 daughters. One 10 years old and the other likely less than a toddler. To this day, no one knows where the 2 of them are, or even if they are dead or not. no news of them either, to the point of suspicion. They were two pretty influential figures, yet no news sources covered their disappearances. Even the one reliable one that did, backtracked almost immediately. If this was real life, there would be a Red Thread episode on this, but in the world of Arknights, no one really cared. The Nearl couple simply faded into irrelevancy. Maybe they were assassinated. Maybe they were sent on a super secret mission. Maybe they had a heart attack and no one cared to talk about it. Who knows? What is clear though is the effect their disappearance had on Mlynar. This was when Mlynar started to lose it all.
Failure can be endured, but the price is always dear.
Mlynar wasn't an unconfident man. He was always the type of guy to keep moving forward even through failures and others' misdeeds. Which is why when his brother and sister-in-law left, he started to look for them. Tirelessly, he searched, but nothing came of it. Not a single clue, or anything. All that was left of them was their daughters, children that Mlynar could barely look after. He started to grow more and more frustrated as time went on, unable to find any traces of his dearest family. Another thing is that while Mlynar was a great man in the eyes of a lot of people, he was still rather controversial. Whether it was his choice of friends or his beliefs, some people didn't like him and were constantly praying for his downfall, like the average YouTube watcher when they find someone slightly cringe. Talking about his beliefs, he was a very opinionated man. He didn't just dislike the commercialization of knighthood, he outright despised it, loathed it. One of the reasons why the Nearl family was so prestigious was their contributions to the Kazimierz military. The Nearl family always produces great warriors and some of them took part in the Major. Mlynar, being the greatest hater of the sport in all of Terra, did not even entertain the thought of competing in it. He believed that knights shouldn't be fighting in worthless tournaments, but aiding the weak, the sick and the hopeless. To him, knighthood wasn't just about relishing in victory, but also enduring countless failures. Sadly, the Major is one of the only ways that knights can prove their worth in this day and age. He also had no desire of taking over as the heir of the Nearl family after Schnitz's disappearance. Probably for multiple reasons, like him believing that Schnitz is still alive, and him thinking that at this point, the Nearl family didn't have much meaning anymore. After Schnitz disappeared, and after their father got old, the family was hallowed. And it didn't get any better after their father died, leaving the Nearl family basically up in the air. Losing most of his passion, not having any clear ways of using his overwhelming power to aid the innocent and even his family, he had no choice but to work as a completely ordinary office worker, all to keep the Nearl household at least somewhat stable. Thing is, he was a warrior and a hero. His talents were completely useless when it came to looking through paperwork and licking his boss's shoes. He could never get much higher because this simply wasn't what he was prepared for. That, alongside the fact that the capitalists he worked for absolutely hated him, made it so that he transformed into a complete nobody. The kind of guy you could easily replace in a day if you wanted. Because of all that, he became much less outspoken and started to really keep all his thoughts and feelings to himself. Unvoiced anger about the state of Kazimierz, unresolved sorrow over the abrupt disappearance of his brother, unbrilliant glory because of the wasted potential he carried with his talents. In short, at the point of the story when we first see him, he's only a shell without a man inside. He hasn't just become disillusioned with everything, he has straight up given up. After all, his unimaginable power couldn't help with anything. Not his family, not his beliefs regarding Kazimierz. And because he needed to be there for the remaining Nearls, he couldn't exactly go out there and save the innocents either. This was where he was needed. Not where he wanted to be, but needed nonetheless. Again, he had truly given up. What more could he do? What more did he have?
That sigh still haunts my mind.
The first time we see Mlynar is in the Nearl event. Basically, the event is about the beginning of the 24th iteration of the Kazimierz Major. At this point, a lot of time has passed since. Pretty much everything, and Schnitt's two kids are all both grown up. There is Margaret Nearl, which I will get to later, and Maria Nearl, the younger sister, and the focus of the, well, Maria Nearl event. Beyond those two, there's another Nearl in all of this called Sophia Nearl. She's the aunt of Maria and Margaret from their father's side, but she is from more of a branch family and not the main one. She also is only technically their aunt, but for the most part acts like a responsible sister to them. Just like a lot of the other Nearls, she too participated in the Major, but got demolished and didn't try again. Her left hand was left fully scarred and became basically unusable for fights. So when she found out that Maria was planning to join the Major behind her back, she was pretty pissed. But after some convincing, she agreed to be Maria's teacher and help her get as far as possible. Maria herself only had one reason why she was going this far: duty. As I said, the Nearl family was dying slowly, so they needed some kind of push to survive. Maria is also a semi-strong fighter, but has a little passion for it. She happens to be more of a craftswoman, not a fighter. Still, this was the only way she could really help her family. As you can probably guess, Mlynar wasn't happy with her decision. To him, the arena doesn't deserve the Nearls, so Maria choosing to participate in that bloodbath is simple blasphemy. They may be losing their nobility, but they can't lose their ideals. But to really hammer in that he is miserable, just as he starts to scold her, he gets a call by his boss, gets yelled at, and he leaves. Later, in the middle of the event, after Maria gets more and more famous, they start arguing again. Mlynar has strong philosophies. To him, the Nearl family falling to obscurity is fine, because at least that way, they fall into obscurity with their pride intact. Maria joining the Major should be against what the Nearls stand for. Remember how I said that some of the Nearls did well in the Major? Margaret was one of them, and she ended up getting into some conspiracies and getting banished out of Kazimierz. Thankfully, she wasn't in danger and after the banishment was working for Rhodes Island. But not only was she stronger, more capable, and more passionate about fighting than Maria, she tried doing the same thing as Maria just a few years before. She participated in the Major and because of some political shenanigans, got booted out of Kazimierz. What can Maria do? What one cannot do, one must abandon. Again, at this point, Mlynar is fully disillusioned with everything. He hates it all and has given up on it all. But most of all, he hates himself. Even his dad couldn't do anything about the current state of Kazimierz. At the end of his life, all he could do was fix Margaret's mistake, before dying in his deathbed with a heavy sigh directed towards the current state of Kazimierz. That greatly traumatized Mlynar, to the point where he constantly hears it even years later. Before leaving again, he calls Maria disgusting, only to go bow submissively to the corporations he hates. He doesn't hate her. He is worried, but he's also angry. Thing is, while Maria doesn't like the way Mlynar does things, she does understand him and agrees with him to some extent. She doesn't want to tarnish her family name, which is why even when she does compete, she doesn't take any sponsors. She wants to save her family in her own way. It's just that to her, Mlynar is too radical. He has the right idea, but his absolute rejection against the new capitalist nature of Kazimierz does nothing to help either. Mlynar's father was also proud of Margaret for choosing the path she did, even if she failed. He had regrets, sure, but he still held hope for his family and especially grandchildren. The that traumatized Mlynar wasn't that deep, it was just a sigh. Either way, the event in general is about Maria getting better and better at the tournament, Sophia constantly telling her to quit out of worry, and a bunch of political things happening in between. Honestly, a decent event. The major trilogy isn't something I'm going to make a video on, but they are good to an extent. They have the common Arknights problem of a bunch of nothings happening and a lot of terribly worded exposition, but beyond those, they're pretty fun. It's kind of goofy the way Maria just kind of sweeps the competition against knights that have been fighting for possibly decades with only like a few weeks of training, but whatever, it must just be the Nearl juice in her veins or something, I don't know. At the end of the event, Maria gets rescued by Margaret in a match that was meant to be quote-unquote botched to kill Maria. Together, the two managed to win against their opponents. The association controlling the major simply let it happen because capitalism. The event ends with Rhode Island joining in for the next event, but before that we get one final confrontation between Maria and Mlynar, this time with Margaret as well. In short, Margaret wants to join in on the championship matches of the major. Mlynar's dad pulled many strings to make sure that Margaret could be safely exiled outside of Kazimierz, where things were getting really hectic for her. But now she was back. She wanted to fight for Kazimierz, the infected, and the Nearl family, bringing everything some kind of glory. As her argument with Mlynar gets more and more heated, he tells her to draw her sword. She's going to fail. She needs to learn how to give up. And if she's going to continue being stubborn, she's going to have to fall to his blade. Better be his than someone dangerous.
Mark my words, there will be battles you cannot win. Have you considered the consequences of those inevitable failures?
Let's expand upon Margaret for a bit. Her expulsion from Kazimierz happened a little less than 6 years ago, and it was because she, quote-unquote, hid her infection. In Arknights, there are infected people that roam the lands, and they are pretty hated by the general public. Margaret had won the 22nd iteration of the Kazimierz Major, but because of her infection, she got kicked out of Kazimierz anyway. Because of the fact that the Nearl family didn't have any other knight representative, and was in a bad situation overall, it was in danger of losing its noble status. Mlynar was pushed into it, but he refused. Because of that, the Kazimierz National Council declared that if the Nearl family doesn't have another knight representative within 5 years, they would lose their noble status. That is the big reason why Maria wanted to join the major. She had to become a quote-unquote named knight, like how Margaret is the Radiant Knight. In reality though, Margaret was never infected. Because of the way she was behaving and her outspoken attitude, the stakeholders of Kazimierz didn't really like her. She wasn't exactly profitable for them, so she was in great danger. So, out of desperation, her grandfather deemed her an infected to get her out of Kazimierz as soon as possible. She wasn't strong enough to handle all of the problems of Kazimierz at the time, so that was likely the best solution. Ever since the 23rd iteration of the Major, the infection segregation has gotten better because of the Blood Knight, but it could be much better still. Which leads us to Pinus Sylvestris, the second part of the trilogy. It's more of a setup for Nearl Light, but the duel between Mlynar and Margaret happens here, and in that match, Mlynar was outmatched. His sword was knocked off his hand and Margaret had won. There was one problem though. Mlynar had refused to use his arts. He was only using his sword skills and nothing else. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe part of him wanted to lose. Either way, he took his defeat gracefully. Margaret wanted a real duel, but this was all she was getting. Before they start to argue again, his phone starts ringing. Before leaving, he warns her to give up. The sooner she realizes how pointless her struggle is, the better. To which she tells him, "But what if I don't end up like you?" He pondered for a bit before leaving. As for the rest of the Nearl family, Maria decides to give up her spot on the Major for Margaret. She never had much passion for fighting, and Margaret would likely fare much better than her. She never wanted to be a knight, she just wanted her family. But this isn't a Nearl video, but a Mlynar video, so who cares about any of that? Before any of this, before he fell into depression, Mlynar had quite a few friends, and one of them was Toland Cash. He's a Sarkaz who cut off his own horns in order to fit in better with other people. Unlike Mlynar, he's still in action and is actually doing well enough for himself. He used to be a wandering hunter before meeting with Mlynar and becoming heroes together on their travels. It would be fair to call them best friends. Nowadays, he is a bounty hunter and also one of the most wanted men on Kazimierz. A hero of the people, for sure, but not a hero of the government. He will be important, just keep him in mind. Next up is Nearl. I won't be getting into too much detail about it, nor will I go over much of the politics. I will mostly focus on Mlynar and his involvement with everything. Also, just so you know, according to him, he could handle Margaret if he wanted to. Whether that's just his loser attitude talking or a real boast, is up for you to decide.
Just like the old days? No.
Mlynar's part in Nearl starts with Toland, who just entered the capital of Kazimierz, calling him a stupid loser idiot. Okay, maybe they weren't best friends after all. There are some great moments in this event, linked by a lot of boring parts. For example, near the beginning of the event, the murder of the infected knight Jamie by the hands of Mlynar is great, might genuinely be the best part of the event honestly. The parts with Tola are great too. Blood Knight is interesting as well, but a lot of it is rather boring. Surprisingly, the least interesting part of the event is Margaret, because for some reason she gets the least amount of characterization in her own event. She has a goal, a quest, and that's it. Again, lots of cool moments linked by rather boring story parts. Mlynar himself gets quite a few moments, some of which are pretty badass. While Toland makes fun of Mlynar quite often, he's also probably the guy who understands him best. Mlynar is enraged, yet hollow, opinionated, yet hopeless. He hasn't really changed, he has simply given up. Toland is also probably the only guy who can actually help Mlynar with his depression. Toland wants Mlynar to live again, to be the hero he once was. So he decides to lure him. Due to a lot of political stuff, a bunch of infected are in danger. A lot of them are going to be killed in a certain place, so Toland simply tells Mlynar where that place is. The way the infected are treated directly correlates to how Margaret is viewed by the public, and by extension, the Nearl family. At this point, everyone still thinks that Margaret is infected and we don't learn the truth of the matter until much later in the event. This bait that Toland gave to Mlynar contains two things that Mlynar cares about. Chivalry of the Knights, basically saving a bunch of innocent helpless people, and the safety of his family. What is Toland's main goal in all of this? The death of the KGCC. There are a few main governmental powers in Kazimierz. The Kazimierz General Chamber of Commerce, which got into power through capitalism and mostly cares about profits. I say capitalism, but they have a very big monopoly in all things Kazimierz, and are probably the most powerful ruling party of Kazimierz. Then we have the Adeptus Prodivliki, which is the more conservative faction of Kazimierz. They come from a more militaristic background dating all the way back to when the many knights of Kazimierz overthrew the monarchy after they got conquisted. They care more about dignity and power. They aren't great though, they have slaves. There's also the Armless Union. Unlike the other two, this one is more of a secret unit that is only there to do the dirty job of the country. Mostly assassinations. While they are controlled mostly by the KGCC, that hold is loose and the Union mostly wants to break out of it. There are other forces as well, like the National Council or the Campaign Knights, but for the most part, you interact with these three in the game. While it isn't strictly confirmed, the real king of Kazimierz is the Great Immaculate Last Knight, which most characters admire. He has been off fighting the waves, but that's not important. Watch my movement video. Back to the story. Mlynar actually does do what Toland expected him to do, help the infected. As the purge was about to begin in the slums of Kazimierz, Roy, a high-ranking Armless Union assassin, spots Mlynar sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper. The purge of the infected couldn't begin, not with him around. If he was there, he would most likely interfere. And if he interfered, the forces meant to kill the infected would be annihilated. So Roy tries to convince him to leave, but fails, and due to other complications, leaves. The funniest thing is that Mlynar in no way acknowledged what he was doing. He was helping out. He was being a hero. He was being a knight. Even he was in denial about what he was doing. From Maria becoming a competitor in the tourney, to Sophia constantly nagging him, to Margaret coming back from her exile and beating him in a fight, plus her constant success in the major, to how Toland handled him. It was only a matter of time. At this point in the story, he is still on denial. But that's good. If he is in denial about his nature, that means that there is something there to deny. Something that would swallow him whole, puke him out and cover him with disgusting, sticky, faint hope. After many, many years, finally, his passion was about to return.
Golden plains, a field of wheat, the path of a nomadic city, and the wake of a catastrophe. The manor's garden, the arena, and those who hand over their last coin along with their last harvest. Father, I've always tried to walk a righteous path.
There are a lot of points in the events where Mlynar does his best dragon impression, just comes in and goes ta-ta-ta, and then fades to the next scene. Every time anything happens, we get a Mlynar static and then continue with the story. It's not important, but I just thought that it was really funny. Either way, Mlynar's influence was great. He was in a surprisingly good relationship with the Adeptus and is still respected by the Silverlands Pegasi, which are one of the main military forces of Kazimierz, supervised by the Adeptus. Not just him, but his family. The Silverlands Pegasi are probably one of the only people that never gave up on Mlynar, nor looked down on him. To them, Mlynar was, is, and will always be a hero, even if Mlynar thinks that he doesn't deserve even an ounce of that respect. Still, after the Silverlands Pegasi stepped foot in the Grand Knight territory due to complicated matters, one of the first things their leader did was approach Mlynar. Still in denial, he kept rejecting the leader's admiration, but that didn't sway his opinion. The Pegasi leader had more respect for Mlynar than Mlynar held hatred for himself. Slowly, he was changing. Thing is, Margaret's plan was never to take down the KGCC or to take down all the people on top, or to reform Kazimierz over the course of the major. Her plan was always to give the people of Kazimierz teeth, or in this case, hooves, I guess. As Mlynar saw it, her battle was pointless because she was fighting the current Kazimierz under its own rules. But Margaret wasn't actually doing that. All she needed to do was be an inspiration, to let the people of Kazimierz know that they have power, that they have a choice. There is also a conflict of ideology between them. Mlynar thinks that the people are sheep, that no matter what, they will not follow a light even if presented one. Margaret thinks the opposite. She believes that as long as someone guides them, they will follow. But to Mlynar, even that is blasphemy. To him, what Margaret is doing isn't guidance but manipulation. She isn't letting people know about their options, she's outright determining the trajectories of their lives. None of that matters though, in the end. Margaret won't change and Mlynar won't be changing before all of this is over. The stages are set, the ideologies are set in stone. Nothing can stop them. Near the end of Nearl, Margaret manages to defeat the Blood Knights, becoming the champion of the 24th iteration of the Kazimierz Major. Due to plot reasons, the Armless Union tried to assassinate her friends and family. But they were quite easily crushed by Mlynar. Mlynar was the one to give in. He finally raised his sword. Or maybe not, I will get to that later. Until now, everyone simply feared his presence. When the Armless Union tried to clear the slums of the infected, he was only there, his sword not risen. But right now, he was actually fighting with his sword. Not even fighting, simply demolishing. He doesn't even care about being labeled as a knight anymore. Kazimierz has no right to decide that for him. Finally, at the end of Nearl, Margaret stays in Kazimierz to work on her goals. But what happens in Kazimierz isn't important for this video. Not that anything happens, it's still all up in the air. Which leads us to the protagonist. Mlynar decides to take a leap. Now that he had some kind of fire, he could at least muster up that much. For 10 years, he had never taken a day off from his job. Due to that, he could take an extended 3-month vacation to do whatever he wanted. He had a goal now, one that he had put off for far too long. His brother and sister-in-law. To find himself, to realize what he needs to do, he has to search for them. Maybe he won't find them, maybe he will wander aimlessly, but he still needs to search. That is the only thing he can do to move forward. He had let down countless people throughout his depression. It didn't feel good, but he didn't have to hold back anymore. He abandoned his ideals. They were only shackles. Before truly leaving, as one final act of kindness towards his family and Rhodes Island, he tracks down the original Darksteel, the one who made the Armless Union, and makes him promise that he won't harm Rhodes Island nor the Nearls. If he did, he would die. And so, the Armless Union stopped their hunt, the storm passing over Kazimierz, leaving a calm weather. Which leads us to the final event of this video, an obscure wanderer, which is when Mlynar was actually released. Didn't think this video would be so long.
The Grand Knight territory's appearance is ever fluid. Today, the city exhibits no trace of what it was 20 years ago. Its sunset-lit silhouette, sunken and gone. Yet, its nightscapes still spring up to my mind, at times wanted, and at times not. Often, I find myself thinking that I should at least try to seek out and reclaim that past.
Mlynar's vacation eventually led him to Dzwonek. Dzwonek? Dzwonek. Dzwonek? Yeah, Dzwonek, maybe. a countryside village type place. It's bigger than a village, but not as big as an actual city. It's also a place that Mlynar had traveled to before during his exploits as a wanderer. During his heyday, he was a beast of a hero, saving countless people throughout his travels. The event starts with someone thanking him for saving him a long time ago, but he doesn't remember the guy. Still, he doesn't act surprised. He simply was doing too much to remember every little thing he did. Not that it mattered for around a decade. He couldn't save himself for the longest time after all. He goes around, becomes the defender of a golden city for a while, but gets paid like nothing, so he leaves it. Still, he isn't the only important character here. Toland's bounty hunting base, one of them, is here, and so is a semi-old Silverlands Pegasus. Seaboard.
Right now I will show how pronounce this word. So let's start. Cyber.
Shibor.
What? Shchibor was another one of Mlynar's friends back when he was a wanderer, and him, Mlynar, Toland, and Mlynar's brother and sister-in-law were all very close. There were other friends as well, supposedly, but we only see Toland, Shchibor, and Mlynar. Shchibor himself lost a loved one due to reasons. She was framed for a crime she didn't commit. He sent a letter to Mlynar to see if he could help, but Mlynar never responded. That would be fine normally, but Mlynar himself admitted to reading the letter, yet he didn't tell Shchibor anything, as if Shchibor's rage was meaningless. So things between them are complicated. As for the story itself, it's mostly Mlynar reliving his past memories, meeting people he had met before, learning about the current state of places he visited before, all that stuff. He even helps out wherever he can, slowly shaping back into his former self. He still doesn't have a sword. I'm pretty sure he did have a throwaway sword at the end of Nearl, but there is a chance that he just threw hands against armed assassins, which would make things much funnier. Most likely though, he just lost his sword between Nearl and an obscure wanderer. You will see why. He doesn't actually fight here, mostly helps out in whatever other ways he can, with the attitude of a tsundere. In summary, it goes like this. He entered Zwonek, later meets a lawyer he helped in his depression. From that lawyer, he learns about a shady company. Later, he helps save an infected, which was framed by the shady company. In the middle of all of this, he meets a Lithanian noble, which he doesn't get along with. Later, along with the infected, he goes to the slums of Zwonek, where a disaster happens, which puts the lives of stupid children at danger, which is when we get to an interesting part. He sees the Lithanian noble in the slums. At first, they act hostile towards each other, but decide to get along to help out in the slums. Thing is, in Lithania, there's a very big focus on classism. A noble cannot walk around with a commoner. Someone who likes music won't hang out with someone who doesn't. Very petty society. So the Lithanian noble want to explore Kazimierz. For all of its problems, Kazimierz is a very open-minded place. The infected are treated horribly, but not as badly as some other places. There is no case of classism. A rich guy can talk to someone poor and no one will really care. You can say that there is some kind of classism there, but it's not apparent. It's surprisingly free. You can do anything as long as you have money, and chances to make money are a dime a dozen. Not everyone can survive in a world like that, but some can definitely thrive on those rules. So, to get the full picture, the noble decided to explore the slums as well, to see the bad parts of Kazimierz. The noble isn't an important person, but his vision is certainly a boon to this video. Anyway, it turns out that this was all a trap by Kazimierz, so Mlynar and the noble start fighting. And then other people join in on the fight, and then it becomes a whole mess. Eventually, everyone goes their separate ways. Mlynar wanted to find Toland, and he succeeds because of his trip to the slums. He hands over the infected to Toland for safety and gets to work. Toland and his bounty hunters had requests of help from Dzwonek, and their investigations led them to Szczybor. Turns out, Mlynar had left his sword for maintenance, because he was going to need it, and Szczybor took it. He also wanted to have the Lithanian noble assassinated discreetly to start a war between Lithania and Kazimierz. From there, he would have the chance to take down all the parts of Kazimierz that he deems unjust. Of course, this is morally a horrible plan, so Mlynar and Toland have no choice but to try and stop him. Because he knew that Mlynar would probably get in the way, he stole his sword. He also had some of Toland's men hostage, so things weren't looking good for the two heroes. As they are discussing plans, they get the info that the Lithanian noble decided to return to Lithania. This isn't good, because in no world is he outrunning Szczybor and his knights. But it's also rather nice because it makes the jobs of Toland and Mlynar easier. So Toland gets the job of protecting the noble, while Mlynar decides to seek out his old friend. And for that, Toland gives Mlynar a spare sword. Even worse for Szczybor, the Adeptus, which were the cause of his lover's death and the main source of his hatred, learned of his plans and told him to withdraw from Dzwonek. Now, he was on a path of no return. But his hatred is only his own, so most of his men stopped listening to him, leaving the entire plan on his own shoulders. The assassination attempt on the noble fails due to Toland, and he's left alone in a very vulnerable position. Mlynar had found him. Mlynar was there to convince him to stop, but they both already knew that it was too late. Szczybor had no future now that Kazimierz knew of his ambitions. They start to argue and fight, because of course they do. Szczybor's plan was always going to lead to despair. He was starting a war. No backstory was going to change how terrible that is. Szczybor is like Mlynar, but somehow more. He believes that the only way that Kazimierz will change is through extreme acts of violence and terror. Szczybor thought that Mlynar thought the same, but that simply wasn't the case. Mlynar had given up on Kazimierz because he simply couldn't fathom starting a war to change it. It's stupid, it doesn't help anyone. It might change the status quo, but that won't matter beneath the mountains of crying bodies. Still, part of Szczybor blames Mlynar as well. Mlynar had not gotten any weaker throughout his hallowed time. There is nothing to suggest that Mlynar couldn't have helped Szczybor's lover in her time of peril. But to Mlynar, there was no saving her at the time. Maybe his younger self would have testified in her favor, but his depressed self would be too quick to give up. He would care, but only drown in his own despair over the state of Kazimierz. Soon, the fight comes to a predictable end. Szczybor was simply not on the same level as Mlynar. Even with Mlynar holding back, Szczybor still lost miserably. Even so, Mlynar didn't want to kill him, so he sheathed his sword. His rage was probably bigger than Szczybor's. He had probably seen worse, and yet he never went too far. He coped differently. He simply gave up, unlike Szczybor. Szczybor tells Mlynar that he saw Schnitz and his wife years ago when he infiltrated Lithania. They were out there. Who knows what kind of mission the Adeptus had given them? Who even cares? What matters is that Mlynar knew now that they were at least alive. And so, before Mlynar leaves, Szczybor impales himself using his own lance. He draws his last breath as Mlynar kneels down to silently mourn his fallen friend. The event ends with Mlynar retrieving his sword and talking with Toland. They talk about their beliefs, bond, before it's time for them to go their separate ways. Now, Mlynar had a goal, an ambition. For that, he joins Rhodes Island. There, he is respected and is a good teacher for whoever is lacking guidance. He isn't sociable, but is sort of approachable. Because of the fact that Rhodes Island sticks his nose into everything, it's the best workplace that Mlynar could have to look for his brother and sister-in-law. He quit his old job becoming a Rhodes Island operator, and he forever changes the way the devs design operators, making them all DPS-oriented maniacs. Curse you, Mlynar. Curse you.
Fear neither hardship nor darkness. A bygone time, unworthy of remembering. A dream, far too lucid.
What makes Mlynar's story so interesting and inspiring isn't how depressed he was, how he rose back up, or how pretty much everyone has given up on him. It's not his fall from grace either. What makes his development so special is that he gave up. He didn't just sink into a bad depression. He fully gave up. He didn't fall down to the bottom of a pit. He was buried alive. He had lost all hope and could only live and breathe despair. Unvoiced anger, unresolved sorrow, unbrilliant glory. That's all he was. Yet, he was still rescued. He still managed to find hope, to find an ambition. Giving up is not an end. True despair is not true end. The only things that can end things are time and death. Otherwise, there is no broken path. Sometimes it's good to give up. Some things you're happier without. Sometimes giving up is the only thing you can do, but that decision doesn't have to be final. Just because you gave up on something doesn't mean that there was nothing worth in that thing, or that there is no hope of continuing that thing. Despair doesn't have to be final, not as long as it's not what you want. Mlynar gave up due to his own disillusionment towards the world around him. No matter how much he tried, people despaired. No matter how much he fought, his brother wouldn't reappear in front of him. So, he gave up. He still had feelings, sure, but he was also rotting away. But after Maria Nearl, Pinus Sylvestris, Nearl and an obscure wanderer, he reformed. Maybe he won't be able to change anything. Maybe he won't be able to save everyone. Maybe his ambitions won't be fully realized. Still, he has no reason not to try. No reason not to move forward. He had nothing, so he had the capacity to fight for everything. He will sometimes lose, he will sometimes fall, maybe even give up again. Even so, until his death, he has a chance to live. Until his death, everything will be temporary. His goals, ambitions, pride, anger, indifference, hope, and despair, he will live through all of them, lose them all, and regain them constantly. He is sapient, and that's all that sapiens are. That is, what I believe, the true essence of despair. Not just that, but any other emotional state. There is little difference between sadness and happiness, yet there is also mountains of difference between them. All a matter of how you look at it. Maybe you understand me, maybe you don't. It doesn't matter, because you don't have to understand everything. Me and you are different. What I think won't be what you think. To you, I could either sound like a god or a complete loser. Or maybe you are just indifferent. Whatever the case, you have most likely watched this whole video to its conclusion. And for that, I have to say, thank you. Who am I kidding? No, you wasted like 50 minutes watching this video. Go do something. Stretch your legs, you idiot.
Do I long for the old days? No. I simply cannot forget. That which I saw in the places untouched by light, and could do nothing about.
I was expecting this video to be like 20 to 30 minutes long, which is why I'm so surprised it was so much longer than I was expecting. Look, I normally make even longer videos, but this one I wasn't expecting it to be so long, but it's a good one nonetheless. I'm actually quite proud of some parts of the script and think that I put my points across rather well. Could I have delved deeper? Sure, but then the focus of the video would be Kazimierz and not Mlynar. Mlynar is by far the most interesting character of that whole saga, which is why he is the topic of this video. Honestly, not much else to say. Like, subscribe, dislike, comment. Give me engagement. If you have any other ideas, tell me. I'm open to them. You know, the hardest part of doing these videos isn't the scripting, voiceover, or the editing. It's trying my gosh darn hardest not to swear.